1, 2, 3.
The following audio exclusive features the uncut conversation from our episode Rooting Out Our Culture of Harm.
Everything worthwhile is done with other people, writes Mariame Kaba, today's guest. Kaba is an abolitionist, organizer, and educator, founder-director of Project NIA, which seeks to end the incarceration of children and young adults, and the author of the New York Times best-selling book, We Do This Till We Free Us, Abolitionist Organizing and Transforming Justice. The collective, not the individual self, is at the heart of Kaba's vision for freedom. Abolition of the prison industrial complex is essential, but, she says, freedom also takes getting to know your neighbors, thinking about how we can help each other, and building an entire society where harm is addressed, people's needs are met, and accountability doesn't require punishment. Here at the Laura Flanders Show, we too believe in the power of the collective, and so all season we've been expanding ours. I'm teaming up with brilliant colleagues who enrich what we do here. Today, for our Juneteenth conversation on abolition, I'm joined by my friend Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis from Middle Collegiate Church in Manhattan's East Village, a multiracial, multicultural, multi-everything congregation dedicated to collective liberation and love, period. Jacqui, welcome to the show. So glad to have you for this conversation. Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth to you too, Laura. I'm so glad to be here with you, freedom fighter.
Let's bring ourselves to the conversation with Mariame Kaba. Mariame, welcome so much to the program. We're really couldn't be happier to have you with us. And I guess I want to ask you and Jacqui to begin something about, where you think we are. The Juneteenth holiday, this Juneteenth, we're celebrating, I think it is 155 years of so-called liberation, the end of legal slavery. But we still have a long way to go to the kind of freedom that you write about and that we all think about and work for. How do you think we're doing? Mariame, let's start with you. Where are we on that long path?
Wow, what a question to begin with. First, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here to talk with both you and Jacqui. I think the best answer is I have no idea where we are. And I think, to me, I don't think anybody else really does either. And I think that's actually part of the work, which is always unfinished, which we know we're just tiny little parts of. I mean, I'm lucky because I grew up with parents and people, mentors and touchstones who always reminded me of how vast the world is and how small we are within that, and that our work is to figure out what is within our control to actually influence and to spend all our time doing that. And I think that's probably held me in really good stead, and it's probably why I've been trying to do liberation work for 35 years or more now. It's what's kept me going. It's to be really focused on, like, right now in this moment, we have an opportunity to change people's ideas and minds about what safety looks like. To push people to think differently about how we interact with each other, and to push for getting more for our folks, to push people to understand that meeting people's material needs is a real important basis of doing politics. So on those fronts, I really feel like we've made progress, but I don't believe in progress narratives. So I think, for right now, I just see so many possibilities opening up, so much opportunity for us to do more and to do better. And I know maybe that's not the answer people want to hear, but it's my answer.
No, I love it. What about you, Jacqui? What about you with this sense of where are we on the path?
Yeah, thank you. It is a profound question to begin with. There's an old Negro spiritual that says we're not what we ought to be, but we're not what we used to be. There is a sense of between the now and the not yet that I'm noticing. But I think I would add to what Mariame is saying, something about if humanity is an organism, if humanity is one in the spirit of Ubuntu, I am who I am because you are who you are, that we're inextricably connected. I would say like my body sometimes has a crisis that teaches me what I need to know. It's not the only crisis, but it's this crisis, right? So last Monday I had a crisis, Laura. My heart literally like was in pain. Oh, this is about stress. So our body, the human family, not only in America, not only in the United States, but around the globe, has had a crisis. It's an ongoing crisis. To Mariame's point, we're a little blip on the screen. The universe is huge. Maybe this is a crisis actually a millennia long. But in this moment, I feel like we're in the crisis that is still about chattel slavery, is about Reconstruction, is about the response to Reconstruction, is about the massacre in Tulsa, right? It is about whiteness, white supremacy in a death throw, I think, and the way that a body will react to the thing that's changing, because it really doesn't want to change. It wants to be in homeostasis. And so I feel like the violence we've experienced, Laura, is like a growing pain or a death pain, a birth pain, maybe that's better. That is something to pay attention to, that teaches us what we're really wrestling with. What we're really wrestling
between
with.
the now and the not yet. I love that, and I hope you're looking after your heart. Absolutely, Jacqui. Coming back to you, Mariame, you talked about yourself as a tiny piece of a big struggle, a tiny, very hardworking piece of a big struggle. Does that explain why you choose to keep your own image out of the public eye? Why we're, for example, not seeing your face right now as we talk?
That's also a good question. And I think for me, I was taught how to organize by people who used to always say that it was always organizers in the back and leaders up front. And, as someone who was taught by those folks, I was always much more comfortable doing work in the background, and felt like that was really where I ought to be. And it wasn't really until a few years ago, honestly, maybe a decade ago, because of social media, that I was pushed to be more public about how I worked, and what kind of work I was doing. And I was asked to speak more about that work. But that hasn't changed my overall feeling about just not needing to be seen in this kind of, I don't know. I don't feel like people haven't earned the right to publicly consume in that way, that people are feeling like they are owed, your very image, your very being. And I just don't agree with that. And I never have. And also, I'm not that important in the scheme of the larger goals that we're trying to push. And I hope people keep their eyes on that and keep thinking about focusing on the larger goals that we're trying to achieve. So,
all right. So focus and clarity. And let's, in the spirit of that, I'm going to ask you just to define your terms. When you say abolition, what do you mean? When you talk about transformative as opposed to restorative justice, what do you mean? Can you start with abolition just so that we're all on the same page?
Person that just passed away recently, Thomas Mathisen, who is a political theorist and Norwegian sociologist, used to say that abolition is an alternative in the making. And I've always appreciated that conceptualization, even though I hate the word alternative, but I've appreciated his conception of abolition as an unfinished work and as an unfinished process. So over time, I came to look at prison industrial complex abolition. I really think it's important for me to put that up front, because that's the abolitionist work that I do and I'm part of, and kind of the political ground that laid underneath me. But that's a vision for me of a restructured society and a world. It's a world where, you mentioned earlier, we have everything that we need and more. And that it's not mainly even just a reaction to these death-making institutions that, of course, I want to destroy and abolish, but it's actually a focus on making sure that the conditions that supposedly make those institutions desired are no longer existent, which would mean that it would make the conditions that we need to establish would make the prison industrial complex itself impossible. So that's a little bit about that. So in the smallest way that people might understand it, it is an alternative in the making. And for me, it's a vision of a restructured society. It isn't just about the destruction and dismantling of the prison industrial complex, though that is a central plank. It is also about the building up of a different world.
And restorative versus transformative, or the other way around?
I mean, that's like, how could we talk about that in such a short period of time? There is such a long storied history of the work of restorative justice. For people who have now come to understand that term in the US, it is the vision of restorative justice that most people are familiar with is a Western-based system and framework that emerged in part through the work of a man named Howard Zehr here in the US in the 1960s and 70s, who saw the beginnings of the rise of what he saw as mass, hyper and mass incarceration, and thought this is not the way to go. And Howard and others in that tradition started to say, we need to know that when harm happens, when a crime, quote unquote, occurs, that crime is a rupture in relationship. And that what is needed then is to get people together, the person who was harmed, the person who caused harm, and the broader community, to think about three sets of questions. What happened? What is needed to repair this harm? And whose obligation is it to do that? Basically, that is the way that people in the US who've been kind of talking about restorative justice in connection to the prison industrial complex have been thinking and using the term. A way to repair the harms that have occurred using all the people who were involved. And that's that. For me, there's a tradition that emerged amongst mostly people of color, trans, LGBTQ folks, marginalized people who were like, I was trained by what I call the restorative justice grandmothers, So I learned that way of thinking, and it really transformed my entire vision of what, quote, crime looked like, of what harm was, of what repair could be. So I owe so much to the learning I got from that Western tradition, particularly Kay Pranis and all those people who, Cheryl Graves, Ora Shub, like so many people who've taught me over the years. But what I found limiting in that was the larger conversation around the conditions that needed to be transformed in order for that harm to not occur again. Mm-hmm. And that began, for me, a search with others about a concept that became known as community accountability and transformative justice. That was really about, like, how do we do all the conversations we need to do amongst people while we're also doing the organizing work that actually transforms the conditions that gave rise to these things in the first place. So it asks us to do more root analysis, and it just has a different kind of, if you have a tree, it's a different branch on that tree. Yeah.
Man, that's I'm so intrigued by that. And I want to just maybe touch base a little deeper in there. We're having this conversation around Juneteenth. We're having this conversation as we think about the sort of final liberation, if you will, of forced enslaved folks. Mm-hmm. And we're also having this conversation, in the middle of this insane race war in our nation. I just love that you're asking questions about the conditions that lead to the conditions that lead to, imprisonment of folks, or the wholesale incarceration of folks. So that takes me to just literally the 13th Amendment. I'm wondering, when you think about the work that you're called to do, the work that you're doing in your community, how does the media, how does education, how does particularly what's happening now in cinema, how do these stories help change the story?
Wow, Jacqui. I would say that I have a fraught relationship with kind of art and media
Mm.
in general. I am, we began by having, Laura mentioned June Jordan, a poet and writer and artist that I have just so much respect for, who was also an activist and much more than all those things. And I never got to meet June Jordan, but her words have been guides for me and sustaining for me to be able to move through the world, get through the multiple failures that are the basic part of living. I take from all these different places to create the ideas that I feel like could be transformative, and can support us in the organizing work that we need to do to actually shift our conditions and transform the world.
Yeah.
But on the one hand, there's that. So there's the edifying, useful, propelling kind of stuff around that. And then we have things like propaganda, which is this kind of the ways that the media has worked to not just uplift, but actually reinforce and entrench particular ideas that make it really hard for us to actually get to liberation. When was the first time, Jacqui, that you ever thought of police and policing?
Yeah.
When was your first, what's your first memory of it?
Probably, honestly, probably officer friendly, like in kindergarten, right?
Yeah. Yes, officer friendly in kindergarten. You may, if you grew up in a house, maybe that, if we have we have a gendered society, you may have grown up in a space, if you have brothers or cousins, or where they were playing cops and robbers. Mm-hmm. There was a whole system in place before you could even be conscious of yourself as a human being, and whether you could actually be conscious of what police and policing was, that had already infused you by the time you were in kindergarten. You had a vision and an idea of what the cops were, what they did, that officer was friendly, and that's been sustained by media. That's been sustained by TV shows. That's been sustained by the toys young people get and that they play with. And it's so dangerous. Mm-hmm. And it's so difficult then to uproot and transform and say to people, well, actually, policing is actually a sustained system of harassment, inherent violence, and social control. When you put that out to people who grew up with of course they're furious, right?
It's a different story. Yeah. If you'd asked me, Mariame, the question, I would have said, actually, the first time I saw face-to-face policing really up close was in Northern Ireland, where the colonial forces have the kindness to call themselves constabulary. The Royal Ulster Constabulary. In the 80s, it was very clear what their job was. They were backed up by the army. This was a colonial power. And forgive me, Northern Irish people out there, but that's what it was. That's what it looked like. That's what it felt like. That has been an interesting and helpful frame for me to look at the US system. And I want you to talk, though, about what we don't see in the media. Right. Because a lot of us would say, how do we ever get out of this, particularly in the transformative way that you talk and write about? Mm-hmm. But you also write about examples where change is happening, where that transformation is at least beginning. And you talk about the work of Project NIA and the work of the project, the Chicago Torture Victims Memorial Project, that brought about some of the only reparations we've ever seen for police torture victims. So if you could just fill us in on the stuff the media mostly leave out.
Just to pick up, just because it's exactly where I wanted to take you. I'm so glad for that interlude. I wanted to just think about, how do we put more in the public square, more in the world, the good news of the things that are working? That's really where I want to go. So please go ahead, Mariame.
Absolutely, thank you. Well, that's, I think, to me, the part of doing that is to do it. We are constantly bombarded in the world with, I'm trying to talk about the problems, and it makes total sense to do that. But there's a poem by Elizabeth Alexander, and one of the things that she said was, this is not the only news, right? Like that there's so, while horrible things are always going on around us, there's so many problems, it's not the only news. And I really believe that. that's actually a guiding thing, which is that there's always something else happening too. And we can be focused on the negative, yes, because that's important. We have to get an understanding in our arms around that, but also there's other things happening. And so you mentioned the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials Project, and I got involved with that in 2010 as an advisory member of the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials. It was a great example of how you could marry art with social justice and organizing to actually allow us to do something that was very hard for most people, which was for years, I mean, decades, 30 years in Chicago, yeah. People had been fighting to expose John Burge, who was a police commander in Area 2 and Area 3 of Chicago, who with, quote, his midnight crew, which were all men, all white, had spent decades torturing Black people in Chicago and some brown folks as well. And literal torture, not like euphemistic torture, right? For years, people had been fighting to fire him first, which that took 20 years. And he was eventually fired, then to prosecute them and see conviction. And by the time I moved to Chicago in 1995, Burge had been fired for 2 years. And community was still demanding, quote, what they saw as justice. And justice for them meant, incarceration, basically. It meant prosecute them, incarcerate them, punish them for what they had done. And of course, you all know that police and policing operates with impunity, essentially. They are even, a lot of the constitutional scholars, everybody's always like trying to find a way to, quote, hold them accountable through the law. And it's ridiculous because they're not actually there to enforce the law. They're there to use their discretion to make law. So one of the things that happened was by the time I got involved, that was many years later, I was kind of not interested in the fight for prosecution. I'm an abolitionist. That's not where I sit. I didn't think it was going to be very successful anyway. I thought people were going to be left feeling very empty if a prosecution happened, and that's exactly what happened. The federal prosecution happened. He got, quote, 4 years for lying about torture. All the people who'd been harmed were still harmed, but now they had unsatisfactory, what they saw as end to a years-long, decades-long struggle. And so to force us to think differently, the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials organized these art charrettes around the whole entire city and asked people to envision what justice could really look like if we didn't just live in these very constrained models of supposedly getting accountability, right? Or punishment or whatever. And out of that came a reparations idea that was inspired by somebody named Stan Willis in Chicago, a very well-known Black civil rights attorney. And it was Stan who in the 1990s was like, BS on this. We need to, this has to not be a legal fight. We need to have a political fight. And that political fight should be based in reparations for the people who were harmed. We need to get material things, for people's lives to be improved. And we need an apology. We need an acknowledgement that this actually took place. In the current system, it's adversarial. It's in no one's interest to admit they did anything wrong, right? And so that was the model through which we were able to kind of use art and ideas to lift the ceiling off our imagination, to push for something different. And that we were successful at it as a whole community in 2015 and have been implementing all the parts of that reparations ordinance ever since. And I say that to just say that there are other ways of being in the world and there are other things to do. We don't always have to keep repeating the same old things over and over again and then expecting the results of those things to be different. We gotta move differently. We gotta have new ideas. We've got to push ourselves also beyond the kind of vengeful feelings we may have to think about like, how are we actually going to address what people need,
I think this idea of raising imagination, of lifting imagination, of having a new vision. I'm a faith leader. This is supposedly our professional job, but I think we also recycle, Mariame, old tropes, right? We just recycle old tropes of, vengeance, of
yes.
Retribution. I mean, we do, sadly. And so I'm curious about what you would want to say to people who are watching, who are raising children, lifting imagination, right? Who are in positions to like preach, teach, write every Sunday, influencing students. I'm thinking influencing children, and I'm thinking about the people who sit in synagogues, mosques, and churches, Mariame, all the time, a captive audience. How do we reimagine? Where you're calling us, because I want to preach what
I am. I'm calling. I'm calling for that. I'm calling for people to, there's an essay in the book that I co-wrote with my friend Kelly Hayes, and one of the titles is called "A Jailbreak of the Imagination."
Yes.
And it's that like we are punishment. Here's what I like to explain to people is that I understand why we punish.
Yeah.
I understand why we punish. There are many reasons, but there are reasons we won't talk about publicly. And one of them is we punish because it feels good. Can we talk about that for a minute?
That's so true.
We punish and we are vengeful because it feels good. We wouldn't do it if it felt terrible. And what do I mean by feels good? It means that when somebody hurts you, you want to hurt them back. That's like a human, natural thing. And so I don't judge people for the feelings of revenge that we have and vengeance. I have them. I want to go after people who hurt me deeply. It takes all the work in the world for me to reel myself back from that. So the pleasure of seeing somebody who hurt you hurt is just like, it's a liminal pleasure. And so we can't not tell that truth of that. At the same time, punishment is also easy. And what do I mean by that? The person who you're punishing doesn't have to be engaged. They don't have to do a single thing. Mm-hmm. It's so passive that you can just go ahead and do it and be done and keep it moving. The opposite of that is to say the following, which is, I want somebody who harmed me to take accountability for that harm. What does that mean? They have to be engaged with me.
Yeah.
They have to actively participate in order for that to actually happen. Mm-hmm. And since most of us feel like people don't want to actually address harm, and they are like, actually, we do believe that people are evil. We have the evil person mentality, mind monster thing in our heads. So we end up in a position where like, we can't do anything but punish because no one's going to want to take accountability. And my answer to that for everybody is, what in this culture encourages anybody to take accountability for harm? The current culture we have right now. Yeah. We haven't built an accountable community. Why should anybody say they did anything wrong? What might happen to you if you admit harm is that you may end up with Damocles sword over your head and end up in a horrible place. Why would you admit that you did it? The whole impulse that you have would be to be like, nah, didn't do it. Don't know who did it. Like, the culture actually encourages that. So we need to shift that. So I would say to parents that teaching your children that when they do wrong things, that you're going to punish them will encourage them to lie to you and to pretend that they didn't do the harmful thing and to evade responsibility. And you are raising a bunch of kids then who are going to be unable to take accountability for harm. And I don't think people want that. I don't think parents want that. I don't think anybody wants that for their kid to be basically already wired for lying at the age of 2. And we see it. I see it with my nibblings. If they do something wrong and you're like, well, and then they're just like, I didn't do it. It's like, well, wait a minute. I just saw you do it. Yeah. Right? Like, so this isn't good behavior for us to reinforce. So I would say to people, always ask questions of your kids. What happened? What were you thinking at the time? Mm-hmm. If you tell me what really happened, like, we'll work through an answer and we'll figure out how to make it better together. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to spend all my time trying to punish you for doing that, but I want you to learn some lessons. Here they are. And I want you to make sure that you don't do this again. And if you do it again, because you're a human being and you make mistakes, we're going to go through this whole entire process again. We created a toolkit My friend Jenny Beeks created this. She's an excellent restorative justice practitioner in Chicago. She created a toolkit called Restorative Justice at Home. And she did a training for folks last September in the midst of when we were in the midst of COVID. And it was attended by 200 people, parents and people who were caregivers, who just wanted to figure out when they were trapped in the house with their children, how to be more restorative with them rather than to be punishing. Because of course the kids were off the wall. They were friggin' cooped up with no friends in front of screens all day with
Right.
parents who were stressed out to the nth degree, right? It was all hitting the fan. But we need new ways. We need different ways to talk with each other. We need new models. We need new language. We need new ways of thinking. And we are doing that. We're offering those tools. Now it's up to people to take those tools and implement.
So, Mariame, I just interviewed a whole lot of people in Minneapolis who are holding two complicated thoughts in their minds at one and the same time. One, they're believers in transformation and abolition. Two, they are glad as heck that Derek Chauvin got convicted on all counts, and they were in the streets celebrating that night. Were we wrong to celebrate in the context of so much impunity?
This is a really difficult question on multiple levels. And I think for me, the main thing is I don't chastise anybody. Again, as I mentioned, if somebody causes grave harm, it's natural to feel a sense of relief or maybe even joy when they are punished. I just don't want us to lie about what it is that's happening. And that is that people were saying things like, this is accountability, not justice. And I guess that's supposed to mean that we've progressed, because in the past people would have said this is justice. And so we're supposed to be happy that now they're using a different word to actually you mean the same thing. No, why wasn't everybody just saying this is punishment, not justice?
Right.
Why do we have to create a new word called accountability to mask what it is that we're happy about? Derek Chauvin has taken no accountability for his actions. He said he did what he was supposed to do, that it was his job. And he's not apologized for it. Has he shown one iota of remorse? Do we think that if he gets out tomorrow, he won't do this again? Like I don't understand. Again, I think that people are human beings and people are feeling all sorts of feelings, and we get joy out of punishment. And I think we should at least just be honest that that's what we're doing, rather than couching it with euphemistic terms that mean the same thing, really, essentially. So I get it. I totally get it. I did not feel any sort of relief or joy. And I'll tell you why. And it's because 3 people are going to die at police hands today, somewhere in this country. And that hasn't changed. And during the time when Chauvin was on trial, dozens of people were killed all over the country by cops. And that isn't going to change because Chauvin is locked up. And I know that doesn't feel exciting to people and doesn't make them feel happy to hear that. And I'm probably not going to get invited to any parties, and it's okay. But I'm telling the truth, which is that these other cops aren't deterred by this. They saw it as an injustice. That hasn't changed. Think about all the statements that came out afterwards saying, what's wrong? Chauvin did what he was supposed to do. Has that shifted? Is anybody working with those people to be like, nah, y'all, this is wrong. This is actually this. No, that's not. Everybody has now washed their hands of the whole story. Everybody's going back to brunch. People feel now like, justice was done, accountability was had, and the system itself that killed George Floyd has not changed one bit. So what are we talking about here? What does that look like? That's not justice. That's not even accountability. So no, I get it. And I'm not trying to judge anybody for their feelings. You're allowed to have your feelings. Your feelings are valid. Your interpretation of your feelings may not be valid, but your feelings are.
That's just really super helpful in terms of truth telling. I like to think I'm a professional truth teller as a clergy, but just the truth of it as punishment, the truth of it as making something feel better, but not necessarily changing things. That's honest.
Exactly. Yep.
When I think back to the first question Laura asked us both, and I was saying we're between the now and the not yet. This Juneteenth program that we're putting together at Middle Church that will include a nighttime celebration of Black resilience and joy, but also a conversation with Annette Gordon-Reed. Her book on Juneteenth. I'm so interested about how many Black women are training the world, Mariame. I just feel like Black women are training the world, and that includes you. And I'm thinking, just wondering about that now and the not yet, right? I'm so blessed that Laura asks me into this conversation with you, that I get to be a student of you and your colleagues, right, and the work you're doing. Where for the people who, please forgive me for being this honest, okay? But where for the lazy people, or where for the people who won't read, what's the first step for the people who maybe also just don't know how to take a first step, get from now to next to now, on the way to not yet? Do you know what I mean? Like, what's the trajectory? What's the path, love? What's the first thing, the next thing?
I think you answered the question yourself, which was the point that one of my mentors years ago used to tell me when I felt like I was stuck. She would say, "It's just, Mariame, what's the next best step?"
Yeah.
Like, what's the next best step? Don't think 17 steps down the road. You have no control over that. What's the next best step? And I spend a lot of my time trying to make things accessible to people in multiple kinds of ways, and in the broadest sense of what we mean by accessibility. And one of the things I've learned is that people often don't know what to do. That it's an actual lie when we tell people that, like, everybody has this innate indigenous knowledge about what exactly to do. And a lot of to me, a lot of the problems in the world can be rooted in the fact that people don't know what to do. And that when you offer people a menu of things to do, they're more likely to do at least one of them.
Yeah.
And so our work, I think, for all of us who are taking action, for you as somebody who ministers to people and is a leader of an institution, is to create a menu of options. And you know this, I'm sure, because, Dynamo that you are, like, that you need to offer people a menu of actions. And let people choose what part of that action within their particular context and in their capacity they can actually do. And we have to have multiple entry points and things that are high commitment and things that are very low commitment. And we can't shame people who can only do the low commitment stuff. There's lots of reasons for why people don't get engaged. And a lot of it has to do with 2 jobs, 7 children, no way of surviving, trying to figure things out. Now, a lot of those people are also super active people in spite of all of those things happening. So I'm not saying that that's the reason why people are inactive. I am saying, though, that there's lots of reasons for why people can't move. And what we have to do is increase the options. And I always say to people, do your work. And people will say, well, what's your work? And I'll say, here's a list of things you can do. I created something at the beginning of 2021 called 9 solidarity commitments to and with incarcerated people. And I just created a list of 9 steps of what people who say they want to organize around mass incarceration and criminalization, actions they could take that are concrete actions in support and solidarity with incarcerated people. So many people have used that Google Doc and come to me and been like, I'm on number 5 of my solidarity commitment for 2021, right? People who probably wouldn't have known where to even start to look for a way.
You say one of the action steps, Mariame, is just introducing yourself to your neighbors.
I mean, those are important things, right? I mean, that's something I learned from a lot of my friends who do transformative justice work, including Mia Mingus, who created this wonderful tool called pod mapping, which is like, how do you create space? Like, how do you know who to turn to when you're struggling and you need support? You need to plan that shit out in advance. But also, what if you cause harm? Who are you going to turn to then? Who can help to give you space to take accountability for that harm? Create a pod map for that. Pod maps became very popular during COVID when people were organizing mutual aid, because all of a sudden they needed to create spaces where they could actually know who to help and who needed help and get help if they needed it. So yes, these are all important things to do. And so we need to give people a menu of things to do. We need to make sure they're between high and low commitment. And we let people know these are the ways you can help. And then there are people who, no matter what you do, aren't going to do anything. And those folks aren't, they're not our people. And we don't need everyone. I think our ancestors have taught us that for the most part, it's a small number of people who create enormous amounts of change. And I know this in New York in particular, because, in New York City, the Committee on Vigilance that was started by David Ruggles and his folks in 1835, which formed the basis of the Underground Railroad in the whole entire country, that was a group of like 6 people.
Yeah. If you haven't read The Kidnapping Club out there, people, check it out. Mariame, you mentioned ancestors, and I just have to ask you before we close, and this has been such a great conversation, and you're right, Jacqui does it in her congregation, forces us all to talk to each other endlessly, mapping our pods right there at Middle Collegiate. But I want to ask you about your ancestors, Mariame. You are the child of immigrants. You're the child of people who helped decolonize, to liberate their countries. Guinea, your father. Can you just trace that connection? Do you trace a connection from Guinea to abolition in the U.S.?
Oh, of course. My parents were returned migrants, which meant they came to the country, and then my father retired. They moved back. In 1991. And so my dad, and kind of being part of a anti-colonial struggle in his country, always, I learned a lot from him. But I think one of the 2 most important things that I learned from him was deep, profound pragmatism and understanding that that ideas are important, but that those ideas have to be grounded. And then the second thing he really taught me was that you don't need everyone. Like you need a lot of people, you need people around you. It's better to work with other people, but that in order to transform the world, you need a committed group of folks who you can work with and build together. And those are important abolitionist ideas, in the sense that the collective matters, but we don't need to worry about like having every single person on board before we can take action. And that it is really, really important for us to remain grounded in ideas matter, but that's not what people are fighting for. People are fighting for material needs to be met and for ways to be able to survive in the world. And we can't ever forget those things. So yeah, there's so much I learned from my parents, both of them, and my grandparents, who were also extraordinary people. So I'm tied to Africa by blood and lineage and history. And I'm also tied to America and the US in particular, because I was born here and raised here and live here. And so I feel really lucky and blessed that I have all those lenses.
Well, the book is fantastic. People should check it out. We do this till we free us. And there's so much in it. We could be talking here for ages. Jacqui, it is absolutely true. It is better to do things with other people. And this has been just a joy and a delight. And I look forward to you joining me in this work in the months to come. Mariame, we tend to end this show, or I tend to end the show by asking people, I'm trying to get from the idea that change is possible or another world is possible to the idea that at certain moments in our lives, another world is actually palpable, that we can feel it. We have felt it, maybe just in snatches, just maybe for a moment, maybe in a dream, but ideally not. Is there a moment like that for you that led you to believe, oh, yes, we can do this?
Wow.
We can do this.
It's a great question.
It is a great question. I'd love to hear Jacqui's response if possible.
Okay, Jacqui, go while Mariame thinks.
Yes, Jacqui, what's your response?
I am my all the things church was a white Dutch church, Mariame. This is the Dutch church. That was the first church in New York. And I'm going to go back in time to say the first time I felt the kingdom of God breaking in, Trayvon Martin was killed. It was a Thursday or Friday. And we were all just trying to think what to do. And we just started making phone calls. And we were like, we are going to be in solidarity with Trayvon through this time.
Mm.
And this just grassroots moment of hoodies, Miriam, a symbol, right? Symbol. Hoodies, we collected iced tea and Skittles and we mailed them down to the police station. But the whitest conservative, person, right, bought 3 hoodies so everybody could have a hoodie on their team, right? The kids had hoodies. There was a sense, Miriam, that our congregation changed from multi-ethnic, multiracial to really anti-racist, really working for reparations. And on my watch, oh my God, it just makes me teary. The people who come together around this issue of revolutionary love and anti-racism blows my heart wide open.
Amazing. That's beautiful. That is beautiful.
How about you?
Yeah, I think it looks like Laura, you were gone for a minute. You're back.
I'm back.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, and yes, I thought that's beautiful. And I take from one of my teachers, Ruthie Gilmore. She always says that the world that we're fighting for already exists in all sorts of fragments and experiments that are in the now. And it's really true. And for me, I'm constantly reminded that world that's the not yet is also the current moment, in particular times and fragments and experiments. And I think for me, the last year and change of this global pandemic that we've been part of has revealed so much of what's beautiful and incredible about human beings, and also all the things that are flaws and that we need to work on. And one of the things that I remembered very clearly was early on when we were trying to figure out what to do in our apartment building around kind of the COVID response, just how our neighbors really just came together and was like, who are the older people in the area, in the building, who are going to need support, who can do runs to the grocery store, who's healthy, who's like, just people figuring stuff out in the moment when they knew there was a need for it to happen, and not letting other people just die. And that to me it's just so indicative of what's possible with us, but also what we do all the time, every single day. We save each other. And I choose to focus on that. It's both to Elizabeth Alexander's point. There is other news. It's not the only news. We choose to save each other all the time. And if we focus on that and keep growing that, I believe we're going to end up in the place that we want.
All right. Well, you give me, both of you, this conversation gives me a sense, a taste that this work can take us to a new type of place. And I truly appreciate both of you being with us. The book is We Do This Till We Free Us. There's much more information at our website. Jacqui Lewis, Mariame Kaba, thanks for joining me.